illegal? Should sex and consent be taught in schools? Well, I'm joined now by Janice Williams, the chair of the anti-sexual exploitation organisation Object, to discuss this further. Thank you so much for joining me, Janice, this evening. Firstly, could you just tell me what is Object, the organisation, and what you do in the organisation?
OK, it's object or object. We object to objectification. We object to treating anybody, but it's mainly women that get this treatment, as objects, as commodities, as something that you can just purchase by the dozen or by the hundred, as if we were things. We think that all people should be treated as human beings. Men, women, children, everybody. But it's women mostly that in the sex trades get commodified and objectified, and we think it's very harmful.
And some of the things that we've been talking about on the show already about this idea that, isn't feminism about individual choice? I mean, isn't that part of what the feminist movement was, which was to give women free choices? And we heard in the top of the hour that there was a woman, Ayala, who chose to be an OnlyFans star and has become independently wealthy and successful as a result of that. Do you see that not as a success, in your view?
No, if that's what she wants to do, to make lots of money quickly on OnlyFans, that's fine. I'm glad she's got money in her account. I would say to her, OK, darling, you've done that. Now, what are you going to do next that will give you satisfaction in your life, that will grab your interest? You prove that you can satisfy people on OnlyFans. Great tick box, bank money. Now, what is your life's work going to be? What's the next thing you're going to get into that will grab your interest, make you get up in the morning, teach you about the world and earn you some more money?
But you talked about you don't think people should be treated as objects, but isn't to some extent that is part of desire? You kind of objectify, you sexualize both other people and yourself, and it's a relationship. I mean, how can you kind of have a blanket view that objectification is just wrong in all circumstances?
We all do it momentarily. We look at somebody and we think, "Cool, they're fit," and we think, "Wow, I'd like to get closer to them," because that's human nature. But hopefully, after that point, something involves like a conversation. OK, you might leap on somebody straight away. You might get lucky. By and large, most of us like to get to know the person a bit. Meanwhile, they're getting to know us. You move in different situations. It might be in a bar. It might be in a group. It might be anywhere. But most of us want in our lives, as well as maybe the odd quick fix of a FUCK, we want actual relationships. We also want to have some kind of common ground with somebody. It could be emotional intimacy. It could be activities that we've got in common other than sex. Most of us, not all the time, but we want relationships with a bit more depth to them as well.
But Object, you campaign for certain legal and political changes, and some of the things you can do, in fact, could you just describe some of the legal changes that you would like to see?
Yes, with prostitution, we would like to see the Nordic model or the Swedish model brought in. This was brought in Sweden in the 90s, and it was very, very successful in changing people's attitudes to prostitution. The idea is that you don't criminalise any of the women in prostitution because mostly they're just trying to get by. You criminalise the buying of sex for money. And so if a man is caught buying sex for money, what they first of all did was send him to John's school, so he would learn about prostitution and the fact that he was exploiting women. And when that didn't work, they beefed it up a bit and they gave those men fines. And within a year or two in Sweden, they had completely changed public attitudes towards prostitution so that people generally saw it as exploitation and it was no longer a sort of, a cool thing to do.
But you're talking about some legal changes there, but aren't you trying to effectively have a legal response to what is potentially an economic question? I mean, Streetlight UK talked about the strong correlation between sex work and homelessness, violence at home, runaways, drug use, time in care. I mean, so why are you trying to have a kind of criminal response to what is?
Well, we're not criminalising those runaways and those kids who've come out of care.
Then do you not want women to have more options and choices to get out of?
As well as what they do with the men, criminalising the men, they also, and we would need those here, we would need those beefed up because other countries that have brought it in found that the exit programmes have to be really, really good. You need to give people ways to get out. You don't force women to say, you mustn't do this anymore, because what they're doing is not illegal under the Nordic model. But you do offer them ways out, which includes housing. I mean, many women in prostitution are single parents, so they need somewhere where they can have their kids and look after their kids. They need an income. They need other opportunities.
But in relation to criminalising the buyer, some of the sex workers that were interviewed after the research into the Nordic model described the fact that the clients had changed. So actually they were getting not younger and more professional clients. They were often getting much more clients that perhaps were in the kind of criminal industry already and didn't mind already being criminalised. They talked about also having to do their work in more clandestine locations because the clients were fearful of getting caught. So actually, it seems to me that there is no perfect solution to the question of sex work.
There is
and
no
actually,
perfect solution. I agree with you there, but there are certainly some things that we definitely could do. One of the really awful things is that women who've been exploited in prostitution from their teenage years, and I know some of these personally, and they've been taken in by the police for soliciting or whatever, and they've got criminal records as long as your arm. And those criminal records follow them all through their lives. So even though they might have been out of prostitution 10, 15, 20 years, they can't go and get a job without this popping up on their record. We really need to get rid of that so that women who have been in prostitution don't have to have it as a life sentence.
But what do you think is the root cause of prostitution? Because what I worry about in these kind of campaign organisations is it's almost to make everyone feel better. Well, we've kind of changed the law and now we say that as a society we don't accept that. But that doesn't actually deal with the root cause of the problem. And a lot of those root causes are complex. And some people even say it's the world's oldest profession.
Well, that's quite a recent quote, actually. That was Kipling, and that was the 19th century. So it only became the oldest profession 100 years ago. So I don't really buy that one. I do think it's a huge problem, and it's not one we're going to solve overnight. But I do think it's a bit like slavery. You know, people say we don't have slavery nowadays. We know we do have slavery nowadays. We have modern slavery. It's different. And prostitution and trafficking are part of that. The fact that we can't solve it with a nice, simple one law doesn't mean we shouldn't keep on trying to change it. Of course we should. I think the inequality between men and women is a huge thing, and the socialisation of men and women is a huge thing. And I would hope that we could change that. I think we need a big education programme in schools to fight sexism in the way that we had one to fight racism in the 80s and 90s. You know, kids that grew up then understood racism from the beginning, and we need a similar sort of thing to teach everybody about sexism as of now.
That's really interesting because that's one of the questions I was going to ask you next in terms of do we need better sex education? But some of the criticisms of that is that you're effectively saying there's a formula to sexual relationships, that it can be something that can be, standardised and taught to kids as a lesson, when actually the reality of sex is it's often spontaneous, it's complex, it's sometimes even a bit, confusing. And actually when you standardise it and turn it into something an institution teaches, then you drain it of its life.
I'm not saying we should be teaching kids a recipe for having sex at all. That would take all the individuality and all the fun out of it.
But even this question of consent has been coming up. And even, we've heard about consent apps and things like that. But is that really the reality of how sex
nobody wants.
happens?
It's a bit like if you're serving somebody a meal. Every time you move a dish towards them, is that all right? Do you like that? Is that on your list? It would ruin the whole experience. And the same, when you make consent the thing, obviously you need consent. If you make it the thing, then you lose a lot of other things. I don't know, I love the series Sex Education, and there's a young man on there who's having sex for the first time. He's doing that. He's saying all the time, is it okay? Is it okay? And he ruins the experience for the woman. She has to say, yeah, of course it is. She doesn't want to be there anymore because you've lost the actual spontaneity of, being involved with each other's bodies and enjoying that and responding to the other person. It's kind of like you've taken over and said, this is the main course, forget the rest. So I think, we do need sex education. We need a lot of assertiveness. We need to teach people about porn, the lessons that porn teaches, which are that girls make a noise and that boys do X, Y, and Z. And the boys think that the girls aren't enjoying it if they stop making the noise, because on the porn films, the girls make the noise all the time. We need to decode that for kids. You don't necessarily need to show them the porn, but you need to say, this is what it is. Porn is for a market. Porn is to make money. And it doesn't mean that your sex has to be anything like that.
Well, thank you so much, Janice Williams, Chair of the Anti-Sexual Exploitation Organisation, Object. Thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. Well, and finally on the show, for culture and